Is there still a role for special economic zones, also known as free zones, in the UAE? That's the subject of today's edition of Inside AB. I'm Jeremy Lawrence, joined here in the studio by Eddie Taylor. Eddie, free zones, there's been a lot of talk about them in recent weeks and months, especially because of the changes to the visas and the foreign ownership laws and the regulations about businesses being onshore. So much has happened. So it brings up the question, is there still a role for free zones? We've had an interesting comment piece in Arabian Business this week. So let's get into what was said.
Yeah, it was a really well-argued piece by Anshu Vats of Oliver Wyman Consultancy, and he's basically saying why they're still relevant. And if we sort of hit the rewind button a bit, they first came to the region in 1985. That was the first free zones that were set up in Dubai then. And they basically offered a very kind of a simple promise, really. If you wanted to invest in a business in Dubai or in the UAE, these were areas in which there was slightly softer regulatory environments. They had physical infrastructure that could help you set up your business. And they would offer sometimes financial incentives as well. So there were basically these kind of like these mini enclaves in which you could come and set up your business and invest in the UAE without having to necessarily partake in the rest of the regulatory framework of the country. And that's existed right the way up until this year, really, in which if you wanted 100% ownership of a business, if you wanted to even way down the line to being a small business where you could get a virtual office and visas for employees, you could do these in one of these free zones or one of these special economic zones.
Yeah.
And the new laws that have come in have sort of slightly taken that off the table. But what Anshu Vats is arguing is that that was never really about what free zones really should be about. They should be about more things like adding GDP to the local economy, helping to diversify the economy, which you can certainly argue that Jebel Ali and DIFC have done. And also they're almost like sort of laboratories for a softer...
Sandboxes, they call them these days,
Sandboxes,
don't they?
yeah, sort of for softer or different regulatory environments in which you can kind of, in a controlled area, in a controlled or defined territory, work out things like, in DIFC's case, kind of bankruptcy laws and things like that.
See if it's a good fit for the country.
Yeah, exactly. And then over time, then what that would happen was there would be a sort of a transitional phase where it goes, okay, let's take the best of that and then integrate it back into the wider economy, which I think is probably what we've seen recently with the change in the foreign ownership laws. That probably wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the success of the free zones in attracting all of these multinational companies to Dubai in the first place.
Fine. So where does DIFC come into this picture?
DIFC is probably always cited as probably one of the most successful example of a free zone working on what we would call softer infrastructure. So Jebel Ali Port is very much about hard infrastructure, where you've got the deep container ports and that kind of stuff, which is enabling companies, and they've got a whole area where you are harnessing the skills of a logistics industry. And that's all about infrastructure, physical infrastructure. What DIFC offers is softer infrastructure. So that's the regulatory environment. It's different governance. It actually operates under a completely different legal system to the rest of Dubai. It's based on English common law, which means that when you're attracting the likes of all of these banks and financial institutions from around the world who are going to bring their skills and their investment and their best people to Dubai, there's a trust that the regulatory and the governance of DIFC is going to be on international standards and will be transparent. So there'll be no surprises when it comes to things like bankruptcies and the kind of things that tend to put people off starting a business in the wider economy.
Right. But the Emirati lawyer, Habib Al-Mullah, very outspoken, controversial and intelligent guy. When he speaks, he should be listened to. He said to Arabian Business a few months ago that free zones had to sort of think again about the services they offer, didn't he?
He did. I mean, we actually sort of had it on the front cover and we were saying, is this the end of free zones? We went quite big on that in his statement. And I think there's obviously a lot of truth in that. And I actually don't think that Anshu Vats is really disagreeing. And I think when you actually go back and read the piece, Habib Al-Mullah slightly walked back that headline thing of like the free zones are over. And he was actually also talking about they have to offer substantial value. They have to offer value to the investors for them to continue to use them, and that would come in physical infrastructure and governance. And they would also have to offer something back to the UAE economy in order to maintain their viability. So I think in a sense they're on the same page here. And Anshu Vats is really talking about the evolution of what they offer, and it's this transactional tool, if you like. They're offering a bridgehead into the wider UAE economy. And I think that's pretty much still holds.
So any free zone, basically, to sum up, has to keep evolving and changing, because as soon as it's got good at something and it's a proven test case, that should be rolled out into the city, and then the free zone has the job of finding the next thing to try.
Exactly. I think you've summarised it perfectly well. So it shouldn't be seen as the host nation versus the special economic zone or the free zone. It should be the host nation encouraging special economic zones and free zones to import the best governance, the best regulatory frameworks, the best new ideas to attract investment, and then the host nation will cherry pick those or begin to absorb the best practices into its wider economy, so everybody gains. So this is really about driving GDP and also diversifying the economy. And I don't think anybody who can look at the UAE economy since 1985 can say that hasn't been the case.
Great. Well, Terry, thank you very much. Glad we solved that question. You've been watching Inside AB. Please do comment, subscribe, share. Join us every weekday morning at 10 a.m. We will see you next time.